or else we never would have got it in. So we ended up winning the singles state championship. So it's pretty cool. It's number 8 for me, which is good, I would say. All right, so we got Nathaniel, Chris. Can you take your hood off? Stay a while. Davion, David, Jordan, Xavier, Francisco. You alive back there? Okay, Ethan. Looks like Chris Gill is the only one that we are missing. All right, here's what I want you guys to do today. As these guys are all joining, everyone in the room has to share one thing that went well first week of hybrid learning and one thing that didn't go so well. All right, everyone's gonna have to talk in the room. Okay, those of you on whatever it's called, Zoom here. In the chat function, you need to type. You can be a private message, it can be public. I don't care. One thing that went well the first week of hybrid learning, and then one thing that did not go well that you want to see improved. Okay, type that in, please. Take 2 minutes or so to do that. All right, who wants to start? If not, I'm going to call on someone. All right, go ahead. You had no Spanish teacher? Who was it? Oh, who was it? Who was it supposed to be? Okay, and what's something they can get better? Okay. All right. Francisco. Nothing what? This is your grade for the day. One thing that went well. Excuse me? Okay, one thing that can get better. Okay, Xavier. Okay. All right, Jordan. Still the Zoom part. David. Yeah, I didn't see you guys on Zoom.
Are you talking about like the first half?
No, like last week and a half.
Oh.
Folks on Zoom, you're supposed to be putting in the chat function one thing that went well last week, or first week of hybrid, and one thing that you want to see improved upon. That's for all the classes, the whole school. Jordan or David, anything else?
One thing that could get better.
Okay, Davion. Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right, over here. We got. Geez, that seems to be a theme. Okay. Olivia. You what? That is always going to be the case. All right. For the most part, those of you that are Zoomers here, most of the answers where people's grades are getting better because they're actually here. The other one is that people are getting lost in the building. So if you are doing all virtual, you don't have that issue. Yeah, I read a lot of the comments here from you guys on chat. If you actually put something in, if you didn't put something in, and you don't want to get 5 points today, that's fine. You can take a 0 out of 5. All right, so we are going to go ahead and get started, though. So if you guys could be ready to take a few notes. Those of you in class, I'm probably going to talk maybe 15, 20 minutes and then give the rest of the time for you guys to get some work done, all right? Can I get a thumbs up? You guys cool with that? Okay, all right, so that means headphones, cell phones, everything's out, away, okay? You guys see the note I wrote up here, fancy handwriting. No cell phones until instruction is finished. I respect you, you respect me. Life goes on and gets so easy. The world becomes a butterfly. That's a Coldplay lyric, if you didn't know that. There you go. Now you learned something today. Zoomers and in person. Tim says, what are we doing? Tim, you are answering one thing that went well last week in the first week of the hybrid and one thing that you think could get better. All right, so I'm going to attempt to do the screen share. It's been a minute for me. I got to move this over first. All right, let me go ahead and move this over so y'all can see it. And now I'm going to share. All right, so those of you that are laying in bed or eating your Pop-Tarts, time to pay attention now. David, you still got your headphones in, man. Like I said, just be polite. I'll be polite to you. It'll all go all right. So let's talk a little bit about what we learned last week. We learned about how Europe turned into a catastrophe after the fall of the Roman Empire. And then we talked about how feudalism, like how all the lands were split up, if you guys remember right. And then we talked about how the Christian church basically took over from there. So if you guys make a little brief outline in your notes, it's like fall of Rome. Fall of the Roman Empire leads to feudalism, which leads to Catholic Church being dominant, all right? So kind of ended on that, and we had a great current events day on Thursday. I think it was Diamond and Ben in this class. Appreciate that. And we're going to look at basically 3 things this week, all right? We're going to look at how Europe broke out of the feudal ages and started to grow into cities like they are today. We're going to take a look at this thing known as the Crusades and the Black Plague tomorrow. Thursday, you guys are doing the PSAT, and then Friday, we got people presenting again, all right? It's going to go pretty quick. I'm fairly certain that your quiz this week is going to be homework over the weekend or Monday, just we won't have time to get it done. I'll see what I can do, okay? So first thing we're going to do is take a look at how states or like nations developed into what we know them as today. And why this is important is obviously later on, these states that develop are going to turn into countries that will end up taking over like the majority of the world. For example, Britain, France, etc. All right, so we're first going to look at the Holy Roman Empire. This would make up like what was Germany, Italy, part of Italy, northern Italy, Austria, Switzerland, Poland, Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic, was all this thing called the Holy Roman Empire. We talked about Charlemagne last week. It wasn't holy because it wasn't like of the church. It wasn't Roman, and it wasn't really an empire. It was just like a patchwork of small states. But because the church and the leader of the Holy Roman Emperor always kind of tussled for who was most powerful, they would never emerge as a massive nation. In Germany itself, this country right here called Germany, won't become a country until the year 1871. I know most of you think that's a really long time ago. That's not that long ago. That's 150 years ago. That's 3 generations of people ago. And then yet they caused 2 world wars. Okay. And were occupied by the Soviet Union and split up in that time period. So, and then they have the 3rd largest economy in the world today, even though they're the size of smaller than Texas. Fairly impressive. France. There was a family known as the Capetians. Hugh Capet was the Lord of Paris. All right. And it was from the Capetians that in Paris that they would start to create a, basically through feudal alliances, create France into a modern day nation state. All right. And it started with Hugh Capet, who was the Lord of Paris, and then he kind of spread out from there. And that's why Paris would be the center of France. Italy was not unified. Italy wouldn't unify until 1856. And the reason for this is Italy was broken up into a bunch of different states. And in the South, people farmed and were pretty much, have you guys ever heard of the mafia before? They came from Southern Italy. Southern Italy and Northern Italy were way different. And we'll talk about these states when we talk about the Renaissance, but they're much more connected to the Mediterranean Sea and trading. So they didn't want to have one set of rules. And so they wouldn't, like I said, until 1856. All right. So you can see a map up here. Okay. You can see how Northern Italy is part of the Holy Roman Empire. You can see how Italy's broken up. You can see France. You can see England here. And it starts to look a little bit like the map of Europe does today. So, taking a look at Britain. Has anybody ever seen the movie The Last Kingdom, or the show? I asked you guys this last week. Everyone go watch it. It's so good. It's on Netflix. It's not age appropriate for you, so I'm not authorizing you to go watch it, but if you get a chance, freaking great show, okay? But it's about how the Vikings basically raided England and then essentially assimilated or became part of England. And the person, William of Normandy, so this was a man of Viking descent, was the only person in the history of Great Britain ever to invade Great Britain and actually win. Okay, he fought against the Kingdom of Wessex. And in 1066, you would now have a French Viking who is the King of England, or the King of the Britons, all right? And so they set up feudalism there. It's called a little bit different. It's called like barons instead of nobles. And they have sheriffs. That turns into the word sheriff. Have you guys ever heard that word before? We still have them like county sheriffs. And in England, they were forced to sign what's known as the Magna Carta in the year 1215. We'll probably look at this on Thursday. This is one of the most important documents ever made in the history of the world, okay? So this King John, who was of Viking descent, was abusing people, basically going around stealing people's land, giving it to his buddies. His buddies were going around and going into towns and taking, stealing, accusing people of doing things they didn't do, putting them to death. And so the other nobles that he wasn't real friendly towards kidnapped him, took him to the most famous bridge in London. It's called the Tower Bridge. Maybe you've seen it before. They hang him over the bridge. They hold him over the bridge, and they put a knife through his throat, and they said, if you don't agree to sign this piece of paper, we're going to murder you on the spot, right here. And King John said, all right. So he signs the paper. So he's known as the weakest king, but also it helped the people. Okay, so here's what it did. The Magna Carta, this is on your quiz, is the Great Charter. That's what it means, Magna Carta. Jay-Z had an album. You guys weren't born yet, called the Magna Carta. You guys remember that? Anybody? No? No? Yeah. Now, they created this thing known as the parliamentary system. So there was two houses, a lower house made up of people from the towns, and then there was an upper house made up of people who were nobles or barons. And they got to advise the king, and they had to advise the king on what the king could and could not do. Does anybody know what that sounds familiar to? What's that?
Sounds like the cabinet.
Not the cabinet. You're close. What's that familiar to? If you want to zoom it up, zoom it up.
The Senate.
Guys, what does that sound familiar to? Come on. Sounds familiar to the United States, right? The Senate and the House of Representatives. Okay, so that is set up in England in the year 1215. The United States is 570 years from becoming a country. England already has that. Also, Parliament had to approve anything in taxation. So if a king wanted to go to war, king wanted to raise taxes, king wanted to do anything, he had to ask permission first. So that is what we call a system of checks and balances, which is very important. Okay, especially with this election we have coming up, I think people are starting to actually think about this stuff. Okay, now it's not a democracy. You got to understand that. People didn't vote, but it still was a check on the power. The other things it did was, and we'll read this on Thursday when you guys aren't live, but you couldn't illegally search and seize anything from people. You're innocent until proven guilty. You had to have a trial. Okay, you could not just be in prison until there was like evidence that you had done something wrong. Okay, so this is typically known as one of the most important things ever made in history because it protected the common person finally from being abused by his noble, all right, or by the king and the king's friends. Does that make sense to you guys? That's why it's called the Great Charter. All right, I'll get going. Some of you look bored. Now, in the second half of the Middle Ages, so basically 1000 CE to 1500, agriculture actually improved. Okay, plows, the moldboard, water mills, horse collar, the horseshoe. All of these things were what we would call technology, which were meant to improve the ability to make more food. Okay, and most of you are smart enough to understand that when there's more food around, going back to like the second day in this class, the more food you have, the more population you're going to have. So 800 CE, there's 29 million people in Europe. 1100, you have 44 million. By 1300, you have almost 80 million people. So you can see the rise in population, again, is directly correlated to the amount of peasants and serfs that live past birth because there's actually food for them. Okay? When you have that many people, naturally people tend to want to live in cities where they can actually trade and grow the economy again. So cities like London, Paris, Toledo is in Spain, in Germany, Berlin, Baden-Württemberg, München, Amsterdam, all these cities kind of started around now. And like the feudal lords who had these cities kind of wanted them because he could tax them and make money. But on the other hand, that feudal lord lost some of his like ability to manipulate and like just tell the people what they could and cannot do. All right. We'll make this pretty quick. So that's going to lead to more jobs. More jobs means that people start to create this thing called guilds. Okay, guilds were essentially like labor unions. I think it's in your intro, and these guilds still exist today. And one of them called the the Hanseatic League. I've been in northern Germany. Each town was known for doing one thing, and that was where a guild was. And what they did was they controlled production. They controlled how much of anything was made. Like maybe they made shoes really well. Well, they were the only ones allowed to make shoes. They put their stamp on the shoes, and they could only be sold for a certain price. So that meant that the people who got into that business all made profit, guaranteed profit. Now, that's not capitalism. That's not how we work, okay, as a country, really, because we work on what's called supply and demand. If David right here wants to buy my, Bayern Munich scarf here, whatever you call it, mask for $100, but Jordan wants to buy it for $105, well, I'm obviously going to sell it to Jordan. But into the trade guilds that were created, basically everything was sold for $100 regardless of who made it, so that they kept the prices up, right? That leads to manufacturing. One of the most important things that Europe manufactured, which sounds lame, is wool. It's come from sheep, okay? And what do you do with wool? It's obvious. You make hats, you make blankets, you make gloves, you make scarves, okay? Europe is cold, okay? It's further north than us, actually. And so they needed that. We'll talk about it a little bit with the Crusades, but once Europe goes in and basically tries to tell the Muslims that they're bad people and kill them in Jerusalem, that leads to more trade routes opening up, reopening of the Silk trade route, etc. Okay, we'll get into that a little bit later. Here's how a little bit of trade looked, okay? North-south trade, really, between this area, what is known as Flanders, which you can see a little bit north of Paris, and then all these Italian city-states, which became very wealthy. And some of you in the class probably have heard of the Italian Renaissance before, where all the Ninja Turtles made art. Well, the reason why the Ninja Turtles were able to make art is because of the trade that developed and the wealth that came into these cities in Italy. All right, socially, this is pretty important for the Western European culture because this will trickle out. Women started to actually gain more respect. And women actually, there were all female guilds, like things that women made. And another thing is because Catholics venerated Mary, they worshiped Mary, they prayed to her because she was the virgin mother who gave up her child, Jesus, according to the Bible, and that being like the ultimate sacrifice, they say prayers to Mary as well. And so that kind of helped women gain some rights. All right, I've got a couple more slides. We're almost done here. So I wanted you guys to see kind of what the medieval city looked like. Take a look at this. This is almost an exact example of a medieval or Middle Ages European city. I've been to a couple of these in Europe. It's really fun to go to because they all look the same. 2-story houses. You can see like the original wall, and then you can see as cities got bigger, they had to build more walls. Typically, you can walk through these walls because there's places where they'd have archers in case they were being attacked. There's only like gates into the city, like so many gates. You can see they knew exactly where the gates were and how to protect them. There was typically a main square where the town hall was, and then usually it's kind of connected to the Catholic Church or the cathedral. And every building had to be 2 stories tall, okay? So that's why when you go to European cities, like massive cities like Paris, London, Frankfurt, Berlin, etc., every building is about 2 stories tall, like Czech Republic, Prague. Okay, Amsterdam too. And there was like a mandate when these buildings are built, so you can see forever. When you go to New York, when you go to Chicago, it's only like that when you get outside the city. Okay, in the city you can't see more than half a block because there's some massive building blocking you. Okay, so very different. And like I said, it still looks like this today in a lot of original areas in Europe. This model would be the basis for every city in North America then as well that the Spanish would make. So you go to Bogota, if you go to Lima in Peru, if you go to Mexico City, if you go to Buenos Aires, if you go to Rio de Janeiro, if you go to Indianapolis, we're basically, everything's kind of the exact same. Okay, obviously tweaked in 2020 version. Okay, here's a couple more examples for you. So upper left is Prague. You can see how you can see forever. Only churches were allowed to be more than 2 stories. That's why you can see so many different churches. This is in Northern Europe. Bonn, I think, Germany. This is Rothenburg ob der Tauber. Here's another picture of a medieval city. Okay. All right. Last slide here. Okay. Learning actually started then to develop because the Catholics made universities. All right. So University of Paris in France, Oxford University, some of you might have heard of that, in London, Cambridge University. If you look over here, the Reutlingen Hochschule, where I went to school in Germany, is 150 years old. This is like 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. But the school that was connected to that was made in the year 1326, called Tübingen University. You can Google me on that. You don't have to, I'm kidding, but it's old, all right? And tons of tradition. Part of this was because the Crusades, which I elected not to talk about today, I'm going to talk about tomorrow, brought back some of the Greek works. And so they started to actually use those works to learn again, all right? And then that's going to lead, this all the other part is just how that's going to eventually lead to this thing called the Reformation, which my church celebrated on Sunday, actually, which we'll get into, I don't know, at the end of this semester, maybe. We got a lot of other stuff to talk about before that, all right? So, guys, people on Zoom, I'm going to let you go ahead and go. You guys, you had all class yesterday to do your intro. You've got 20 minutes today. Take advantage of that time, please. I'm so tired of missing assignments. You have no idea. All right. Thanks for being here. And I will make sure I code you guys as present. And if you guys have any questions, I can leave this on for a minute or two if you need to talk to me individually, okay? All right. Peace out, guys. Girls. All right, good people in here. What questions do you have? You want to know when you're presenting? Do you have any questions about current events? Yes, sir. It did, because I fixed it at 7:28. I was literally changing my kid's diaper. So I was changing one kid's diaper, making eggs for their breakfast. One kid's screaming in the high chair, and I think Jordan sends me a message, and I'm like, oh, God. So I grab my computer with one hand, pin one kid down. There's poop on the floor. The eggs are burning, and I'm like, I published the dang assignment. So I did publish the assignment. It's there. Yeah, it's there. Go under modules. Now, get your computer out. None of y'all did it? Come on now. Get it out. Let's go work through some of them. Come on. What? Are you serious? You know why I'm happy I'm here? Nathaniel, do you know why I'm happy I'm here? You're correct. But I need to stop this share because if I don't,